On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, it's time for the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the 80th anniversary, and a discussion about logistics. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. A little change of attire here for myself, not in my traditional Hawaiian shirt. Homecoming at Campbell University, home of the Fighting Camels. So got to wear camel with pride today. I'll be back in my normal attire for my next video, but today I want to talk a little about history. Me, the historian, cannot pass up the opportunity to discuss an event, especially on an anniversary, the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle ever fought. What I want to do is look at the Battle of Leyte Gulf a little differently than you may have seen it in the past. Now, there are tons and tons of videos out there on the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Just a quick search on YouTube has quite a few here. The Operations Room with a great video, World War II TV, Battleship New Jersey, and Paul over at World War II TV with a batch of interviews out there. And I'll actually emphasize that last one there. That's Mark Still's book, Leyte Gulf, A New History of the World's Largest Naval Battle. Love this book. Great book. Makes you look at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in a different way. What I want to do today is give you a different perspective of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. I'm not going to walk you through every battle and the details. There are great videos and books out there you can read. What I want to talk about is the logistics aspect. Why logistics plays such a big role in the Battle of Leyte Gulf and how it actually changes the battle in some ways. Some ways I don't think the battle gets examined as it should. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. So one of the things to understand about the Battle of Leyte Gulf, I pulled this chart here from the U.S. Military Academy's Atlas series. It's a great series. If you want to go look at some great maps and images of World War II, head on over. I'll have the link in the show notes. One of the key things that happens at the Battle of Leyte Gulf is the twin drive strategy. This is the drive across the Central Pacific and the South Pacific come together and focus at Leyte Island in the central Philippines. You get General MacArthur and his forces coming up from the south. At the same time, you get Admiral Nimitz and his forces, specifically the 3rd Fleet under Admiral Halsey, along with one of his amphibious units, bringing one of the 2 corps that are going to land at Leyte together. And there is an issue of divided command. It's something that's talked about quite a bit. MacArthur was in command of the Southwest Pacific area. Nimitz was in charge of the Central Pacific Ocean areas. And during this battle, there's going to be a divided chain. Admiral Halsey, who has the 3rd Fleet, he's been in command of the 3rd Fleet since August of 1944, will be operating outside the parameters of General MacArthur. But Halsey's been given an order by Nimitz that when the Japanese fleet shows its head, to go after it and destroy it. That is his primary goal. That's his primary issue, because defense is going to be provided by Admiral Kinkaid and the 7th Fleet. So I think one of the things that's missed in a lot of histories about this event is, number one, is the distances and the mileage that is put on the U.S. fast carriers over the past year. Remember, November of 1943 is the invasion of Tarawa and Makin Island. It's really the beginning of the Central Pacific offensives. We start seeing the arrival of the fast carriers in mid-1943. So Essex makes its arrival, the Essex-class carriers, the Independence, first of the Independence-class light carriers. These are Cleveland-class light cruisers that are modified. And those ships make their appearance. But from November of 43 until October of 44, 11 months, they're under almost constant operations. Give you an idea here, Admiral Halsey takes over 3rd Fleet, which is basically 5th Fleet, just renamed because it's under him, not under Admiral Spruance, on August 26th. On August 29th, his fleet sorties from Inuitak in the Marshall Islands and undertakes about a month-long operation hitting Iwo Jima, the Palau Islands, the Philippines, Morotai. It is a long, protracted combat from August 29 until September 24th. They're in constant combat. They're hitting islands, pulling back, refueling either in port or at sea, and hitting and supporting a variety of operations. It's almost a near month of combat operations. On September 24th, they disperse over to a batch of different bases to replenish and refuel. But in about a week and a half, they're back at sea again. On December 6th, the fleet sorties from Ulithi Atoll, heads up to Okinawa, launches a series of strikes against Okinawa, hits Taiwan Formosa in a epic battle that doesn't get the attention it deserves. During that battle for Formosa, two of Halsey's cruisers, the Houston and Canberra named for an Australian heavy cruiser sunk during the Battle of Savo Island, are hit, nearly lost. Amazingly, those ships are not lost. Fortunately, there's a pair of fleet tugs on hand. They're able to tow him out. But then he goes on to strike the northern island of Luzon in the Philippines and cover the landings that take place on the Philippines in mid-October. So an almost constant level of combat for months on time. Remember, the Fifth Fleet becomes the Third Fleet, but it's the same ships and crews and air crews and aircraft. And so there is a grinding down of equipment, materiel, and personnel that take place. By October 25th or so, when the Battle of Leyte Gulf is at its peak, these crews have been at sea and combat for long, protracted periods of time, longer than most naval vessels have ever been at sea before in a constant basis, unless you go back to the age of sail. So I pulled these stills from the Combat Studies Institute of the U.S. Army. They have some great PowerPoints, so you got to love the U.S. government and their PowerPoints. I'll have the link so you can download it too. It's great. It's a great PowerPoint. It even comes with sound. It's fantastic. But what I want to show you here is the attack that's being staged here by the U.S. And so you get a couple of key components here. Task Force 38, that is the fast carriers. This is under the command of Vice Admiral Mark Mitzer, but Halsey is in overall command. Halsey is riding with the fleet. Now, you also have Task Force 34. That is the surface elements, which are not formed independently. They're scattered among the 38 task forces for protection, for anti-aircraft. So you got 6 battleships, 5 cruisers spread out among them. Each of the carrier task force are made up of 2 large-deck aircraft carriers, largely Essex class, except for Enterprise. She's the only old carrier that's out in there. And then 2 light carriers from the Independence. So it's a big striking force. You're talking about 8 big-deck carriers and 8 small-deck light amphibious vessels. And they take position east of the Philippines to provide coverage as the 6th Army comes ashore. The 10th Corps from MacArthur's forces and the 14th Corps from Nimitz's forces. And then you have the protecting force by the 7th Fleet, 6 old battleships, 5 of them up from the mud at Pearl Harbor, plus the Mississippi, and 3 heavy cruisers, and then 3 escort task forces, each of them made up of 6 escort carriers for a total of 18. It's an imposing fleet, one of the largest we've ever seen. And in terms of striking power, hard to imagine a more powerful fleet than this. The Japanese develop a plan, the Sho plan, which is a very orchestrated plan. You know the Japanese in World War II, they love their intricate plans. And this plan is no different. What they want to do is pull the American carrier task force out of position by providing a decoy. They're going to use their remaining carriers, or at least some of their remaining carriers, Zuikaku, the last veteran of Pearl Harbor, 3 smaller fleet carriers to basically, or light carriers, excuse me, to pull the U.S. Third Fleet out of position. In the meantime, the Japanese are going to send the bulk of their surface forces down. Force A, their main striking fleet containing the 2 super battleships, Yamato and Musashi, along with the Nagato and 2 remaining Kongo-class battleships, will go through the Sibuyan Sea, come out through the San Bernardino Strait, and come at Leyte Gulf from the north. The Force C will come in. This is 2 battleships, Fuso and Yamashiro, along with some support vessels, and then a second striking group of cruisers will come down. This will be used to sweep up Leyte Gulf and hit the transport fleet that's there. The idea is to create a pincer here on Leyte Gulf and catch the Americans and their transports, destroy the beachhead, with the idea of creating a decisive battle and maybe convincing the Americans to come to a negotiating table. Very unlikely. So right from the beginning, things go awry for the Third Fleet. First off, the Third Fleet is not the Third Fleet. It is at a reduced capability because it's been at sea since the beginning of October. Admiral Halsey has to dispatch part of his forces away for not just replenishment, but for maintenance and overhaul. So he loses 3 out of his 8 big carriers are sent down. The entire Task Force 38.1 is sent down, along with one other carrier is sent down, and 2 of the light carriers. So you get the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea. This is when Force A is sighted coming through. They are alerted to this by the attacks against Force A by a pair of American submarines, the Darter and the Dace, which sink 2 heavy cruisers and damage another. They impose a huge toll. You actually see American fleet carriers being used as they were designed for to attrit an enemy fleet here. You saw a very similar performance by the fleet submarines during the Battle of the Philippine Sea when they sank 2 Japanese aircraft carriers, Taiho and Shokaku. Here they're doing the same, attriting down the Japanese force. And the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea is kind of a mixed battle, I would argue. While they will damage a heavy cruiser and sink the super battleship Musashi, they neglect hitting some of the other ships. There's a bit of a pile-on. When Musashi is hit, the American pilots kind of pile on, but you also don't have the full striking arm of Task Force 38. You only got the 5 big deck carriers. And remember, the light carriers only have a striking detachment of 9 Avenger torpedo planes. It's the big deck carriers that have full squadrons of dive bombers and torpedo planes on board, and Halsey is missing 3 of those. You also have airstrikes being launched against Task Force 38, and for the first time, a fast carrier will be lost since 1942, when Halsey was down in command of South Pacific area. It was under his command that the last fast carrier was lost. That was the Hornet, down during the Battle of Santa Cruz. Well, off of Luzon, USS Princeton is going to be hit. CVL-23 is hit by a conventional bomber. It is a decisive hit. Will detonate warheads and torpedoes on the vessel. Will not just sink the Princeton, but damage several of the cruisers that are on scene there. The Birmingham, for example, that is close aboard when the Princeton explodes. This is probably a little bit of a shakeup for Halsey. You got to remember, Halsey has been ashore since 1942. The last time he was at sea before the previous August, I mean, he was just out the previous month doing the raids, but before that, he's not out at sea again. Last time he was out at sea is April of 1942 when he does the Doolittle raid, heads down to Coral Sea, is too late for Coral Sea in May, arrives back at Pearl Harbor. He is hospitalized because of an illness, misses the Battle of Midway, and then goes down and replaces Admiral Gormley in the South Pacific. So he's missing a lot of this. This is his first time back at sea, and so him being in this position is not unusual. Task Force 38 has been attrited because of issues. We've got a good chunk of it being away because of resupply. We've lost the Princeton now, and now Halsey is heading north after hitting the center force down here in the Sibuyan Sea, sinking Musashi, damaging another vessel, and you had these 3 previous vessels that had been hit earlier by the submarines, Darter and Dace, off Palawan. He believes center force is spinning around, turning around, and is going to head out. So he heads north, chasing after the carrier decoy force. Remember, Nimitz told him his objective is to sink the Japanese fleet, not to provide coverage for the 7th Fleet. This needs to be clear. You got to read Halsey's orders. He is doing what he was told. A lot of people believe that these orders were changed because of what happened with Spruance in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, where Spruance didn't go after Ozawa's force as enthusiastically as some wished he would have. Now, there is a debate about Halsey creating Task Force 34, the 6 battleships, 5 cruisers, and cutting them loose. The problem with this that most people don't look at, and I don't know why, is that takes away nearly the entire escort force for the fast carriers. It literally leaves them with some anti-aircraft cruisers and destroyers. That's it. There's no surface warfare real ships left with them. And they lose a lot of their anti-aircraft protection. Remember, Halsey just lost Princeton. He's been under almost constant air attack from shore repeatedly. He doesn't quite know that the Japanese aircraft carriers are denuded of aircraft. He's worried about being lured into a trap. And does he want to lose the vessels that provide him the most anti-aircraft coverage? Remember, these are ships fitted with variable timing fuses. The VT fuse is the game changer. It is shooting down aircraft like crazy. And you're talking about removing them. Now, there is a discussion in the group about leaving part of the battleships and part of the screen there. Admiral Bogan, in command of CTF 38.2, wants to take the Intrepid, the Independence, and the Cabot, along with some surface vessels, and sit here off San Bernardino Strait. Now, the problem with that is Independence is a night carrier. It is equipped for night flights, not for day. So you would only have one large deck carrier, one light carrier, and some of the surface vessels where you're dealing with air attacks out of Luzon. It's not really an ideal position here to be in. So Halsey decides to keep the fleet together. The problem is he doesn't communicate this very well. Communications is a big problem because Halsey is communicating with Nimitz directly, and then Nimitz has to communicate to MacArthur and down to Kinkaid. There should have been a structure in place that put Kinkaid under Halsey's command in some sort of way so that the 3rd Fleet and the 7th Fleet were communicating. But Halsey's also not worried because you have the covering force of Oldendorf's battleships, 6 battleships and 3 heavy cruisers, plus 18 escort carriers down here. So he's not too worried about that. You get Halsey chasing after Ozawa's force, and he manages to sink all 4 of the aircraft carriers. It is decisive. Zuikaku, the last of the Pearl Harbor veterans, is lost. In the meantime, at early in the morning, at about 0400, you have the Southern force come through Surigao Strait. This is the arrival of the Southern force. Fuso and Yamashiro will come in. Now, Jesse Oldendorf is ready for this. He has 6 battleships, 5 of them, retreads from Pearl Harbor, Pennsylvania, California, Tennessee, Maryland, and West Virginia, and then you throw in Mississippi. This is a powerful battle line. You can't underrate that battle line. You've got 2 battleships, Maryland and West Virginia, with each of them 8 16-inch guns. The other 4 have 12 14-inch guns. That is a massive amount of firepower. Add to it cruisers, both heavy and light cruisers, and 3 destroyer squadrons. That's a powerful force. And what we see here is the Shirama's force is absolutely obliterated. Fuso and Yamashiro are sunk. Mogami gets hit. It is a disaster. I mean, an absolute evisceration of that force. And in truth, the battle line doesn't fire that many shells. Some of the ships are not equipped with radar to be used at night. Some of them are, but not a lot of gunfire is gone from the main battle force. What we see is a lot of torpedoes being launched by the destroyer squadrons. Again, about 3 destroyer squadrons are present there. A lot of fire from the cruisers down the area. Then you have, of course, what's the most famous is the fight of Taffy 3. If you have never read Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors by James Hornfisher, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, it is epic. The story of the destroyers of Taffy 3 and destroyer escorts of Taffy 3 are absolutely amazing. I think they're really impressive. However, I want to talk a little bit about the logistics here, because I think the logistics is the important thing. Again, this is the whole heart of the story. Plenty of videos talk about the fight of Taffy 3. You can go into them. But the thing that gets me is this. This is the map showing you the arrival of the center force. Here's Kurita coming out of San Bernardino Strait, coming down. And here is Taffy 3. This is the Northern Escort Task Force under CAF Sprague. The middle task group, Taffy 2, under Felix Stumpf, is here. And then the Southern Task Force under Thomas Sprague, yeah, there's 2 Spragues, it's confusing, is coming up from here. So the thing I want to highlight here is a really important issue, is why is CAF Sprague where he's at? I, for the life of me, don't understand why he's so close into the island of Samar. If you look at where Stumpf is, look where Sprague is, the other Sprague. They're out at sea. They're waiting until daylight before coming in. CAF Sprague puts himself right between San Bernardino Strait and the entrance to Leyte Gulf right here. He's right there. He should be over here somewhere. He's not. And this is where he runs into problems. Now, I think CAF Sprague doesn't get a lot of criticism for this for obvious reasons. He fights a heroic battle. He puts his ships on the line. He is the one who's able to pull center force out of going into Leyte Gulf. It is an epic battle. It is absolutely heroic. However, if CAF Sprague was out here, he could have been launching his air attacks in general against The center force, without opposition, he wouldn't have lost, one of his 6 escort carriers. He could also have combined together the destroyers from his group and potentially Stump's group to launch an attack against Kurita's forces combined with the destroyers. I think we get dogged into the story, which is an epic story. Again, it's historic. Again, you don't have USS Johnston, USS Herman, USS Hull, Ernest Evans, the captain of the Johnston. It is a amazing story. But I've looked at Cap Sprague's orders. Sprague's orders was to be anywhere, as much as 50 miles off the coast of Samar. That would have put him out of at least range of Kurita's forces, so he doesn't come under direct gunfire. That would allowed his 6 carriers, along with those of Stump and Sprague, to launch repeated air attacks against this force. And, we don't criticize Cap Sprague for this because of the actions, but I do think it's something we need to ask. The other thing to ask is this. So I took that last chart and the previous one and superimposed. So this is the Battle of Surigao Strait here, and this is what you see happening. Here's the battle line. This is taking place at 5 in the morning. Here is center force at 6:45, at 8 o'clock, and at 9:20. The 6 battleships are right here just north of Surigao Strait. This is Leyte Gulf. There are 2 entrances into Leyte Gulf. This is the main channel right here. This is the one that the U.S. 7th Fleet came in. They swept for mines, and they came in this way to land up here. This is the landing beaches up here. There is another area right here that you could potentially come through, but it is not that deep. You can come through it. It's a risk. Don't get me wrong. I've looked at modern charts about this. I pulled up marine traffic and looked. You can sail through this, but this is usually the perceived channel right here. Oldendorf 6 battleships. Again, 16-inch guns on 2, across 2 battleships, and then 12 14-inch guns on 4 different battleships, 48 14-inch guns against Yamato, no question, much more powerful 9 18.1-inch guns, but Nagato with 8 16-inch guns, that's equivalent to either Maryland or West Virginia, and then Congo and Haruna, each of them have 8 14-inch guns. The 4 other battleships that Oldendorf has 12 of them, so you are outgunning Kurita by a substantial number. Plus, this would have been in daylight. He would have been Kurita would have made the passage either the northern strait into Leyte Gulf or probably the southern one. This is the way I think he was going to come down here and loop in here in broad daylight. Oldendorf would have his 6 battleships. Now, he sent some cruisers and destroyers chasing after the remnants here of the 2nd striking group, but he still would have had some of the cruisers back in time. He would have had several destroyer squadrons, at least 2 that didn't fire torpedoes, available up here. So he could have done a second Battle of Surigao Strait on a much larger level. He would have capped across the T against the Japanese Kurita force in a way that they would not have been able to get in. I can't foresee how Kurita could have come under the withering fire of 6 battleships, 6 standard class battleships. These may not have been as fast as the fast battleships, but these were top of the line battleships. I'm sorry. These battleships had proven themselves time and time again. California, Tennessee, and West Virginia had all been rebuilt. Mississippi had had a substantial reconstruction prior to World War II. Pennsylvania and Maryland, not as extensive, but they were still powerful battleships. Again, these ships are maybe 20 years old, compared to vessels today. We're talking about ships being 30, 40. Eisenhower just came back from the Middle East. It's 50 years old. These ships are not that bad. They would have been substantial. Plus, not much older than Congo, Haruna, and Nagato, which are the same time period. Let's remember, they're all the same time period. They would have had a withering barrage to get in here. More importantly, if they're not able to get in here, they got to turn around, in which case they probably would have run into Task Force 34 coming down after it was detached. Remember the famous message, where is Task Force 34? The world wonders, which is a whole story into itself. But, Halsey hauls ass with his fleet heading down the San Bernardino Strait and would have caught part of Kurita's force. So if you look at the battle as it unfolds, then there was an opportunity for, the center force to be absolutely obliterated if Halsey had detached Task Force 34 and perhaps Bogan's task force come down here to block San Bernardino Strait. Center force would have been caught between two opposing forces, especially if Task Force 38, Task Force 38.3 and 4 are coming down right behind them. They could have caught him, which would have wiped out Yamato, Nagato, Kongo, Haruna, and the last of the cruisers of that force. It would have been a absolute decisive victory. But again, I think all too often we don't look at the issues that go on in and around that water. Again, if Calf Sprague had been in a different position, then maybe you get the second battle of Leyte Gulf, where Oldendorf's battleships have a day to prove themselves again. They prove themselves at Surigao Strait. Then again, they prove themselves at the entrance to Leyte Gulf. And then the center force gets obliterated out. It's one of those interesting things about how logistics plays such a role. If Task Force 38 hadn't been running around as long as it had, and if only Task Force 38.1 had been available with their 3 heavy fleet carriers and 2 light carriers, then maybe the center force would have gotten more damage in Sibuyan Sea, or Halsey would have been more, better positioned to split Task Force 38 into a pursuit unit against the decoy force, while he maintained part of his force down here guarding San Bernardino Strait, or if there had been better communication between Halsey and Kinkaid. I think all those units are really crucial. But again, I got to go back with, this is a decisive victory for the United States. Even with everything that happens, it's a decisive victory. You sunk, 4 Japanese battleships, a score of heavy cruisers. You sank a heavy carrier, 3 light carriers, and what you lost was an escort carrier. Later on, you lose another one to a kamikaze attack, St. Lo, and then you lost Princeton along with some destroyers. This was a decisive victory for the United States, and I think understanding some of the details behind the battle, we get very caught up in the heroics, which the heroics are amazing. Again, I can't underrate those enough. But when you start looking at the details of the battle, there's so much to learn from this battle that's really important. How tired Task Force 38 must have been. You imagine those pilots under constant air attack, launching and defending the carriers, hitting airfields, bombing the Japanese center force, going off to bomb the Japanese carrier task force. That's a lot of combat for pilots in the heavy in doses. And you got to imagine by the end of this, Task Force 38 is spent, and then right after this, they got to cover the landing at Mindoro, where a batch of those carriers get hit by kamikazes. The landings at Lingayen in Luzon, where they get hit again. If you look at Task Force 38, it gets hammered here repeatedly from land-based attacks. And we don't appreciate how deadly those land-based attacks are against the carrier task force. Because we have a deep bench, we can pull carriers in and replace them. We don't realize the attrition that's going on here with ships not just being hit and damaged, but also cycling out because they've been in combat for over a year. After a year, you got to go back for overhauls. And you're seeing that happen. You're seeing the first carriers go back for overhauls. Why do some carriers miss the battles? Because they got to be replenished. They got to be rebuilt. These are new type vessels that are being broken in. It is a lot of combat. The reason Halsey has 6 fast battleships is because 2 of the fast battleships can't be there because they're undergoing repair and overhaul. He doesn't have 8. He's missing 2. He's missing North Carolina and Indiana. So all of that plays a role here, and I think understanding the logistics of the battle and a little bit more detail than people tend to go is really important in peeling the onion of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a big thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Homecoming here at Campbell University. I get to have fun tomorrow. Looking forward to it. I get to coach the alumni lacrosse team, and I get to welcome back our distinguished alumni from my department. Always excited about that. Get to see some faces I haven't seen in a while. Until our next video, this is Sal, signing off.